now observe as Veterans Day. Every day is Veterans Day. For us on Tuesday, we passed a packet of bills, 9 bills, to improve the lives of our veterans, our heroes in uniform. Among the bills, we were very proud to pass the Deborah Sampson Act, which reduces barriers for women veterans to access VA, including anti-harassment initiatives. This has a broad base of support, and we were very proud to be passing it. So on the day after Veterans Day. On Monday night, when I came into town, I went to the World War II Memorial just to see who was there and just to visit it again. I love going there. It's so inspiring. And I saw I was impressed particularly by 2 engravings on the wall, one that related directly to all veterans. President Truman said, "Our debt to the heroic men and valiant women in the service of our country can never be repaid. They have earned our undying gratitude. America will never forget their sacrifices." How beautiful. And then particular to women, not necessarily in uniform, but women in the war effort by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. He said, "Women have given their sons to the military services. They have stoked the furnaces and hurried the factory wheels. They have made the planes and welded the tanks, riveted the ships, and rolled the shells." That in addition to serving in the military. So again, we honored the men and women in the war effort on Monday with our 9 bills. And in terms of increasing paychecks, we are this week, today and tomorrow, considering the Export-Import Bank, which creates nearly 2 million American jobs in all 50 states. Over the last decade, it has created over 2 million jobs. It is very important legislation. There will be some it shouldn't even be a partisan issue, and sometimes in the past it has not been. There will be an attempt by some to say XM should not be doing any business with China, and I modestly say that I take second place to no one in the Congress for over 30 years of fighting China on their trade policy, on their human rights policy, on their proliferation policy. And there are restrictions in the legislation about government-owned industries and the rest of that. However, again, as critical as I am of China's policies, by some accord, they advertise me as most hated person in China, something that I take with great pride because of my fight for human rights in China, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's Tibet, whether it's Beijing, or whether it's the Uyghurs, the Muslims in education camps. Nonetheless, they should not use that as an excuse to not pass the XM Bank, and I will speak to that on the floor. In the same token of globalization of economy, we are moving positively in terms of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Again, it all comes down to enforcement, enhancement too, but enforcement. I do believe that if we can get this to the place it needs to be, which is imminent, that this can be a template for future trade agreements, a good template. And then again, in terms of the financial well-being of America's working families, we are working on H.R. 3, our legislation to lower prescription drug cost, and hopefully we will be bringing that to the floor soon. And next week, we will vote on the continuing resolution to fund the government. We've passed our appropriations bills, making smart, strong investments in the health, education, economic security, and well-being of America's families. Sadly, the GOP Senate has not done its job yet. Soon, again, now another area in terms of legislation, we'll be bringing the Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4. H.R. 3 is health care, reducing the cost of prescription drugs. H.R. 4 is the Voting Rights Act. We're close to closure on that, and certainly hope that that will be finished in this session of Congress. So as I say, we legislate, We investigate, and I'll get to that in a moment, but we litigate. And on the litigation front, yesterday, Congress and the rule of law had an important victory as the courts once again resoundingly reaffirmed Congress's authority to conduct oversight of the executive branch on behalf of the American people. Sadly, we have a president who does not believe in a separation of power, says that Article 2 says he can do whatever he wants. It does not, and he cannot without oversight from Congress and respect for legislation passed by the Congress. And so, as the court stated, contrary to the president's arguments, the committee possesses authority under both the House rules and the Constitution to issue the subpoena, and Mazars must comply. Mazars is the accounting firm that has the president's records. We'll see how that goes, the accommodations back and forth in the next few days. But according to the decision, they're supposed to release the information in 7 days. It may be that we extend an accommodation to them for longer, but that remains to be seen by the committee and our lawyers. On the investigation front, yesterday it was a very somber, prayerful day. I thought it was a successful day for truth coming from the president's men, people he appointed, a person that he appointed most recently to the State Department. Again, none of us has come to Congress to impeach a president. We come here to do the work of the American people, to make the future better for them, to try to do so in the most bipartisan way possible. Find our common ground where we can, stand our ground where we cannot. But yesterday you heard an appointment of the president speak in very unambiguous terms, a courageous public servant. The devastating testimony corroborated evidence of bribery uncovered in the inquiry, and that the president abused power and violated his oath by threatening to withhold military aid and a White House meeting in exchange for an investigation into his political rival, a clear attempt of the president to give himself the advantage in the 2020 election. Doing so, as I've said to the president, jeopardize our national security, undermine our national security, jeopardize the integrity of our electoral system, violate your oath of office. I salute Chairman Schiff for the dignity and the statesmanship that he brought, and the members of the Intelligence Committee, the Democrats, for the showing great patriotism and professionalism with which they are conducting the proceedings. I'm very proud of them. I said to the members at the beginning of the day yesterday, when we take the oath to protect and defend the Constitution, we agree and we become custodians of the Constitution. The Constitution, the brilliance of our founders to create a republic, a system of checks and balances, 3 co-equal branches of government, separation of powers, each a check and balance on the other. As custodians of the Constitution, we must be defenders of our democracy, because our democracy depends on that republic and not a monarchy. Article 2 that says I can do whatever I want. So again, with that responsibility, we go forward sadly, prayerfully, they say with a heavy heart, because it's not what we came here to do, but we must uphold our oath of office. Questions? Yes, sir.
James Rosenwood Sinclair. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We hear it said routinely, and of course it's true, that impeachment is a political process, not a legal one. And yet, as we can all observe, many of the accoutrements surrounding the legal process are inherent in this political process. We have counsels, depositions, subpoenas, threats of perjury, and so forth. This was made starkly clear yesterday by Chairman Schiff, it seemed to me, when he reminded the minority that he would do everything necessary to ensure the legal rights of the whistleblower to preserve anonymity in this political setting. And so I wonder if you could explain to the American people why the legal rights of the whistleblower should prevail in this political setting over those of President Trump, who should ordinarily enjoy a right to confront his accuser.
Well, let me just say this. I'll say to you, Mr. Republican Talking Points, what I said to the President of the United States. When you talk about the whistleblower, you're coming into my wheelhouse. I have more experience in intelligence than anybody in the Congress, anybody's ever served. 25 years on the committee as top Democrat, ex officio, as speaker and leader. I was there when we wrote the whistleblower laws. The whistleblower is there to speak truth to power and have protection for doing that. And any retribution or harm coming to a whistleblower undermines our ability to hear truth about power. So I will defend the rights of the whistleblower vehemently.
But why should
Vehemently.
we prevail over the president's
Well, the
legal
president can come, if he has a case to make, does he want to come speak? Does he want to present in writing or speak to the committee about his, what might be exculpatory for him? He has that right to do. But nobody, president is not above the law, president will be held accountable, and nobody should have the right to endanger whistleblowers. And that is the system that I will defend. And the American people understand that. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about bribery a second ago.
Yes, bribery.
That's a very serious charge.
It's
What
in the
is it
Constitution.
of bribery?
Well, you know, we talking Latin around here, e pluribus unum, from anyone, quid pro quo, bribery, and that is in the Constitution attached to the impeachment proceedings.
So what was the bribe here?
The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections.
So could we
That's
be looking
that's
at-
bribery. Yes.
Could we be looking at an article of impeachment?
I don't know about that. We haven't even made a decision to impeach. That's what the inquiry is about. And when the committees decide that, and they will decide what the articles are. But I am saying that what is the president has admitted to and says it's perfect, I said it's perfectly wrong. It's bribery. Yeah.
You've talked in the past about the importance of the public being along on the idea of impeachment, of bringing the public along. Do you think yesterday the witnesses, your members, the questioning was effective in convincing the public this is a worthwhile thing to pursue?
Well, look, first and foremost, we have a responsibility to honor our oath of office, to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that is our responsibility. The clarity for the public to understand what is there wasn't as clear, in my view, when you say obstruction of justice, obstruction of justice, obstruction of justice 11 times in the Mueller report. That is justification enough for inquiring into an impeachment. This had a story, a narrative about the president threatening to grant or withhold certain privileges, certain military assistance voted on by the Congress to Ukraine, which is in our national interest to do so because they were fighting the Russians. They've already lost over 11,000, 12,000, 13,000 people fighting the Russians. That's why I say all roads lead to Putin. Putin benefited from our not any holding up of that foreign military assistance. Putin benefited by the action taken by the president vis-a-vis Syria and Turkey because they wanted a stronger stronghold in the Middle East, and the president gave them that. Putin benefited from the president's comments about uncertainty about our support for NATO. Putin benefited. The list goes on. I won't even go into the elections, just those three, because they're the three I have mentioned to the president when I have said, with you, Mr. President, all roads lead to Putin. Yes, sir.
You kept saying that you haven't really decided whether to move.
We haven't. That'll be up to the committees to decide.
But do you believe that yesterday's testimony from Bill Taylor and George Kent at all moved the needle for Democrats more towards articles of impeachment?
This isn't about for Democrats. This is for the American people. This is about patriotism. It's not about politics, Democrats, Republicans. It's not about anything political. It's about patriotism. It's about honoring our oath of office and to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution spells out what our responsibilities are and what our penalties are. And yesterday, I do believe the truth will set us free. And so the truth coming from the president's own appointee, describing bribery and threatening, in the course of it, threatening the identity of the whistleblower was just shameful behavior on the part of the Republicans. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you, you said USMCA is imminent. How do you think AFL-CIO is poised to respond if the implementing bill is going to be considered in the House?
Well, we have shared values with the AFL-CIO and believe that the growth of our economy is blessed with more participation from collective bargaining, workplace safety, all of that. So I think we will have we'll see what the implementation is, what that is, and the enforcement is, and I think it will be a value that is shared by our friends in labor as well as the Democrats in the Congress. So we're in a good place. We as I say, I want this to be a template for future trade agreements so that the work that we put in here will not only have a benefit in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, but for the globalization discussion in general. And so what we'll have to do is, as soon as we come to conclusion, is to have the implementing language written, and we have an idea of what that would be. So I think I'd like to see us get it done this year. I mean, that would be my goal. I don't imagine that it would take much more in the Senate to pass. I mean, some of our legislation we want to pass this year, but we don't know what happens in the Senate. I would hope that they would move quickly with this.
Speaker,
Yeah.
do you believe then personally?
Chad?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. You say that the House has not obviously decided
That's right.
to pursue impeachment yet.
That's right.
But when we see the hearing yesterday,
Right.
a lot of questions about impeachment. You talk about three distinct things there: bribery, abuse of power, things that could go into articles of impeachment. Why would the public not think that the House is dead set on a course to impeach the president when all of this milieu is going on right now?
Well, all this milieu is a seeking of the truth. It's called an inquiry. And if the president has something that is exculpatory, Mr. President, that means you have anything that shows your innocence, then he should make that known. And that's part of the inquiry. And so far, we haven't seen that, but we welcome it. And that's what an inquiry is about.
Do you think that there is a way, considering all that they're doing and all the hearings and all the depositions that are coming, that there's any way that the House could not impeach with all of this work regardless?
Perhaps you have not heard me when I have said, this is something we do with a heavy heart. This is very prayerful, because impeaching is a divisive thing in our country. It's hard. And the place that our country is now, it's not a time where you go to 70% when President Nixon walked out of the White House. It wasn't there before he left. Even 2 weeks before he left, it wasn't there until the other shoe fell and he walked out the door. And by the way, what President Trump has done on the record in terms of acting to advantage a foreign power to help him in his own election, and of the obstruction of information about that, the cover-up, makes what Nixon did look almost small. But again, an inquiry is an inquiry, and people come in and you hear what they have to say. Next week, some of the Republican suggestions of witnesses will come in, and we'll hear what they have to say. But this is not something that you take lightly, and you make a decision as you go along. One last question, yes, sir.
On the CR, it's going to come when you guys
I'll
are
do your next.
passing, when these hearings are still going on. I'm curious if you've been negotiating the continuing resolution, these spending
Yeah.
bills. What's been the working relationship with the White House? I mean, have they been involved in this process? I guess the adage of walking and chewing gum at the same time comes to mind.
I'm not a gum chewer, but I do eat a lot of chocolate as I walk around here. We obviously, the president, the four branch, House, Senate, Democrats, Republicans, and the White House are we all have to come to an agreement. And left to our own devices, the appropriators that come from the culture of appropriations and intelligence, that's where I was forged in the Congress, both places that, by and large, when I first started there, were not particularly partisan. But the left to their own devices, the appropriators know how to get their job done. So without going into any detail, we're moving in a direction because we do not want a shutdown of government. We prefer not to have a continuing resolution. So we have to make some decisions as we go forward.
But
Sure.
you're confident the White House is gonna sign off?
When you say the White, you mean the administration?
President Trump's gonna have to.
Well, the
sign it.
administration. Let's just say the administration. Okay?
Okay.
And whoever they may designate at the table. Cheryl?
Madam Speaker, given that Republicans have been arguing that yesterday's witnesses only heard things secondhand, I'm wondering if you think it would be worth waiting for those who have heard things firsthand, like John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney, to testify.
Cheryl, don't fall into the secondhand stuff, really. That is such a fraudulent proposition put forth by the Republicans. That is such a fraudulent proposition. And and they know it, and that's why they're talking about process rather than the substance of what we have heard. I just won't even dignify what they're saying in that regard. I just won't. No, but we are engaged in what the Constitution charges the Congress to do, to make its decisions. We are not here to be manipulated by the obstruction of justice of the administration. On the one hand, they say that it is secondhand, and on the other hand, they obstruct all of the people who they would consider to have firsthand knowledge from testifying. Obstruction of Congress, obstruction of justice. I'm going to come back to H.R. 6. This is something that we're so proud of. But over 160 days ago, we sent to the Senate H.R. 6, the American Dream and Promise Act. This is a bill that would protect our dreamers in our country. These young people who've come to our country made such a valuable contribution. We're grateful to them for that and to their parents for bringing them here. And the president has said he supports the dreamers on the one hand, and on the other hand, he calls them thugs. So you never know who's showing up that day in the White House. But the fact is that the American people support the dreamers. And I hope that the Senate will, again, be cognizant of the fact that like 80% of the American people want the dreamers protected in our country. So we started Tuesday morning on the steps of the Supreme Court as the court was hearing the oral arguments, beginning and then hearing the oral arguments on the legislation that relates to, on a policy that relates to the dreamers. At the same time, we're fighting them in the courts. We're fighting the president in the court of public opinion and winning that, and now we're in the Congress of the United States as well. I just want to remind, and I didn't go to the oral hearings arguments this time because so many people had an appetite for the tickets. That's usually the case. But when you're there, you have to be very constrained. You can't even adjust your glasses because they might think you're taking a picture or something. It's a very, I don't know if you've ever been to the oral arguments, but the temptation to jump up and say something is great. Of course, you can't. But if I had been there, what I would have said is that President Ronald Reagan, you've heard me talk about his last speech and how supportive he was of newcomers to America as the vital force of America's preeminence in the world. But in addition to that, before his last speech as President of the United States, when the Congress passed the immigration bill of 1986, a comprehensive bipartisan bill passed the Congress, signed by President Reagan, he then said to Congress, "You did not do enough." So he instituted family fairness, which gave protection to a higher percentage of people than President Obama did with the DACA order. Highest percentage. President Reagan and Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, and then the continuation in that presidency going on with President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Obama, all all supportive of that point of view until this president. It's very sad. So I would hope that the court would, President Reagan's decisions were upheld by the court. I would hope that this court would use that as precedent. But we'll see. We don't know. I've heard different versions of how people interpreted what one judge said, another judge said, and the rest. But I do know one thing, that if the court supports President Trump on this, they will be doing great harm to hundreds of thousands of people and families in our country, and I hope that pain will be a part of their consideration, because they have to consider the impact, and I hope that they will understand the blessing to America that our newcomers are, and I hope that the Senate will pass H.R. 6. Thank you.